Imagine this. You're sitting alone in a quiet room. There's no music, no screens, no one else around. The kind of stillness where you can hear the faint hum of the walls, the soft thump of your own heartbeat. And yet, there's a voice, not a real one, not someone speaking out loud, but a whisper threading through your mind, shaping every thought before you even know you're thinking it. It tells you what you can't do. It reminds you of every mistake you've made, every failure you've endured. Sometimes it pretends to be reasonable, logical, concerned for your best interest. Other times it's merciless. You don't remember inviting it in. You don't remember giving it authority. And yet, for as long as you can recall, it has been there, commenting, judging, steering. Now, imagine someone sitting across from you, repeating the exact words your inner voice has been whispering for years. You're not good enough. You'll never change. What's the point in trying? If another human being said these things to you every day, you would call it abuse. You'd cut them out of your life. You'd see it as toxic. So here's the unsettling paradox. When that voice comes from inside your own head, you not only tolerate it, you believe it. Why? You weren't born with this voice. Infants don't stare at the ceiling wondering if they're enough. No child comes into the world narrating their every move with suspicion and self-doubt. Somewhere along the way, it took root. Somewhere along the way, you became both the jailer and the prisoner. But here's the most disturbing part. That voice is not you. It never was. And yet, if I asked you who you are, you'd probably hand me a list of the exact labels, fears, and stories that voice has been reciting. You'd unknowingly give me the script it wrote for you. What if your entire life up to this point has been built on a foundation poured by something that isn't even you? The problem is, it's good at hiding. This inner critic, this counterfeit narrator, doesn't come wearing a villain's mask. It comes dressed as your conscience, your rationality, your realism. It speaks in your own voice. It uses your own memories as evidence. It doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be constant. And constancy has a way of feeling like truth. So you keep listening. You keep acting according to its version of reality. And somewhere in the blur of days and years, you stop questioning whether the voice might be wrong. You stop asking whether it belongs to you at all. But ask yourself this. If a voice can be programmed into you by culture, by parents, by experiences, doesn't that mean it can also be rewritten? If you can inherit a mental soundtrack, doesn't that mean you can change the music? Most people don't. Most will live and die without realizing that they were not the author of their own internal script. They'll keep mistaking the echo for the origin. You've seen it before. Someone who had all the potential in the world, but they talk themselves out of every opportunity. Someone who sabotages relationships because they already know how it will end. Someone who never starts the thing they've been dreaming about because their inner voice tells them the odds are too slim. And maybe, if you're honest, that someone is you. The real tragedy isn't that we have an inner critic. It's that we treat it like a trusted advisor instead of what it really is, a relic of conditioning, a leftover fragment of someone else's fears, opinions, and limitations lodged in the architecture of our thoughts. But here's where the tension sharpens. If you strip away the voice, if you silence it entirely, what's left? Would you even recognize yourself without it? Would you feel liberated or lost? Because that's the quiet terror no one talks about. The inner critic may be your jailer, but it's also been your constant companion. To silence it is to walk into unfamiliar territory, where your thoughts don't immediately tear you down, where possibilities remain open, and where your worth isn't measured in constant judgment. And that's where the danger lies, not in killing the critic, but in daring to meet the version of yourself that's been buried underneath it all along. So I have to ask, if you could rewire that voice, not in a year, not in a month, but in 7 minutes, would you? And if you did, would you still be you? The answer to that question is more complicated than it seems. And before you decide, you need to understand where that voice came from in the first place. The voice inside your head feels intimate, but it is, in many ways, an intruder that entered before you had the power to defend the gates. To understand it, you must walk backward through time, past your current frustrations, past the polished self-image you present to the world, past even your earliest memories, into the shaping years where the blueprint of that voice was drawn. Psychology has long recognized that much of what we call the self is, in reality, a patchwork of other people's imprints. Carl Jung called these inherited fragments, complexes, clusters of memories, experiences, and emotional patterns that operate autonomously in the psyche, often against our conscious will. Your inner critic is one such complex, an amalgamation of parental warnings, schoolyard humiliations, cultural dogmas, and the subtle pressures of belonging. From the moment you were old enough to be corrected, you began internalizing the judgments of others. A raised eyebrow from a parent when you spilled milk, a teacher's sarcastic comment when you answered incorrectly, a peer's laughter when you wore the wrong clothes. These moments may seem trivial, but the human mind is not a courtroom that weighs evidence fairly. It is a sponge that soaks up emotional intensity and lets it seep into identity. By the time you reached adolescence, you had already built an inner monitoring system, a constant internal judge that anticipated criticism before it came. This wasn't just self-sabotage, it was self-defense. If you could beat yourself to the punch, you could soften the blow when others judged you. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." The inner critic thrives on this truth. You did not choose its existence. It was installed like a hidden operating system. And because it feels like you rarely question its authority. Yet the problem is deeper than personal history. Societal forces shape the critic's vocabulary. Modern culture is built on comparison, social media feeds engineered to trigger inadequacy, advertising industries that survive by manufacturing insecurity, entire economies dependent on your belief that you are incomplete. From childhood, you are measured against grades, beauty standards, income brackets, follower counts. Each measurement comes with an unspoken message: you are not yet enough. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre argued that human beings are condemned to be free, that we must create meaning in a universe that offers none. This freedom is terrifying, so we cling to external definitions of worth, even when they hurt us. The inner critic thrives here, acting as a mouthpiece for society's impossible standards. It's easier to obey the voice than to face the vast uncertainty of defining yourself from scratch. Carl Jung might say that the critic lives in your shadow, the part of you that holds all the traits, desires, and instincts you have disowned. The voice doesn't just attack you, it polices you, ensuring you never stray too far from the identity you've been conditioned to uphold. Step outside your comfort zone, and it will whisper reminders of past failures. Try to love yourself unconditionally, and it will drag into the light every reason you don't deserve to. But here is where the paradox deepens. In its own warped way, the critic believes it's protecting you. It warns you against risks to prevent humiliation. It tells you not to expect too much, so you won't face crushing disappointment. It reminds you of flaws so others can't use them against you. This is why silencing it feels dangerous. It's like dismissing a guard who, despite being cruel, has been keeping watch for years. The trouble is, this guard doesn't just keep danger out, it also locks possibility in. Nietzsche saw this as the tragic cost of herd morality, when individuals surrender their own instincts to conform to the collective's rules. In doing so, they internalize the herd's voice as their own. What you call self-doubt may simply be the echo of 1,000 invisible expectations you've absorbed without consent. And this is why most self-help advice fails. You can't simply think positive to outshout the critic. That's like trying to play louder music over a fire alarm. It might distract you, but the system is still wired into the walls. You must go deeper, to the wiring itself. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, discovered something profound in the camps. Even when stripped of every external freedom, humans retain the power to choose their attitude toward circumstances. This choice, this tiny gap between stimulus and response, is the wedge you can use to pry yourself away from the critic's control. But first, you must see the critic for what it is. Not truth, but conditioning. Not identity, but programming. And programming can be rewritten. But before we get there, you must grasp the scale of its influence. This is not just a voice in your head. It is an architect of your life. It has determined which opportunities you've pursued, which relationships you've kept or abandoned, how you respond to failure, and even how you interpret love. It doesn't just shape your actions, it shapes your perception. You may believe you see the world as it is, but in truth, you see it through a filter the critic has tinted with its own fears. It decides what is possible before you even step forward. The roots of this voice reach into every layer of your being, biological, psychological, cultural, and until you recognize the full extent of its grip, you will keep mistaking the prison walls for the horizon. The next question isn't just where it came from, it's what it has been silently doing to you all along. Because the damage isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's invisible until it's too late. And that's what we must explore next. Picture this. You're walking through a crowded street, 1,000 lives intersecting in fragments. A mother rushing her child to school, a man checking his watch for the 5th time, a street musician lost in a private world of melody. On the surface, you're just another moving part in this great machinery. But beneath it, something far quieter and far more dangerous is happening. The inner voice is narrating everything you see, everything you are. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It works like gravity, invisible, constant, and inescapable, unless you learn to name it. The tragedy is that most people never do. The consequences of this silent authority are everywhere, but they rarely look like disasters. They look like normal life. That's what makes them so insidious. The voice changes how you interpret events. It takes a minor inconvenience, someone not texting back right away, and spins it into rejection. It takes a single awkward moment at a party and reframes it as proof you're socially incompetent. The voice is an expert in cognitive bias, though it doesn't know the term. Confirmation bias becomes its favorite weapon. Every scrap of evidence is bent to prove what it has been whispering all along. It also rewires your ambitions. You might have once dreamed of writing a book, starting a business, learning a language, or telling someone how you really feel. But before you even take a first step, the critic runs a simulation in your mind, one in which you fail spectacularly, and convinces you the outcome is inevitable. It robs you of possibilities before life ever has the chance to test you. In neuroscience, there's a concept called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated experience. The inner critic thrives here because every time you listen to it, you reinforce its neural pathways. Over the years, the voice becomes less like a visitor and more like the architecture itself. Eventually, its presence feels like part of the natural landscape of thought. And here's the chilling part. The critic doesn't need to be correct to control you. It only needs to be constant. This constancy shapes your identity. You begin to describe yourself in the voice's language. I'm not a people person. I'm terrible with money. I've just never been good at relationships. These aren't objective facts. They're verdicts you've accepted from a voice that is not impartial. Once they take root, you live as if they are unshakable truths, crafting a life small enough to fit inside the critic's boundaries. On a larger scale, this same mechanism molds entire societies. Groups of people can share the same inner critic, an inherited narrative passed through culture. People like us don't do things like that. Our kind never gets ahead. This is just how the world works. These beliefs become self-fulfilling prophecies, not because they reflect reality, but because they define the limits of what people attempt. When enough individuals share the same inner restrictions, those restrictions solidify into tradition, law, or unspoken social code. The personal becomes political, and the political seeps back into the personal. In this way, the critic's reach is recursive. It shapes you, you shape society, and society's norms feed the critic right back. But the damage isn't only external. It corrodes the most intimate parts of you. Consider how it distorts your relationship with failure. Without the critic, failure is information. It tells you what didn't work, so you can try differently. With the critic, failure is identity. It tells you who you are. That subtle shift is enough to make you avoid risk entirely, and it poisons your relationship with success as well. Achieve something, and the voice will downplay it. Win an award. They just felt sorry for you. Get a promotion. They must be desperate. Even joy becomes conditional, always at risk of being dismantled by the voice's relentless post-mortem analysis. Perhaps the most devastating consequence is how the critic limits love. When you believe the voice's harsh verdicts about yourself, you unconsciously teach others how to treat you. You accept less kindness, less respect, less care, because deep down, the voice has convinced you that's what you deserve. It's easy to underestimate the scale of this problem because the critic's work is subtle. It doesn't destroy your life in one dramatic strike. It erodes it grain by grain, day after day, until you can no longer remember a time when you were free from it. And here's the cruel irony. The more power it takes from you, the more you cling to it. Why? Because it offers a false sense of control. If you believe the critic's warnings, you can avoid the pain of uncertainty. You never have to face the possibility of failing at something that mattered. But in shielding yourself from that pain, you also shield yourself from everything that could make your life worth living. It's the ultimate bargain with the devil. Safety at the cost of the self. At this point, you might be thinking, fine, I get it. The voice is a parasite. But how do I remove it without removing myself? That's the great dilemma. And it's why so many never attempt it. The critic feels like a core part of your identity. So cutting it out feels like self-erasure. But what if the opposite is true? What if removing the critic is the only way to find the self you were always meant to be? The rebellion starts when you realize the critic isn't the source of your thoughts. It's a filter. Every belief it hands you can be examined, tested, and rewritten. But this rebellion isn't polite. It doesn't ask the voice for permission. It doesn't wait for the perfect moment. And it begins with a shift so radical, it will make you question every assumption you've been living under. That's where we go next. The breakaway. The point where you stop negotiating with the critic and start dismantling it, piece by piece, until the voice loses its throne. The rebellion does not begin with loud speeches or grand declarations. It begins in silence. When you finally notice the voice in mid-sentence and think, wait, who is speaking right now? It's a strange sensation, the first time you catch it in the act. Like seeing your reflection blink a second too late in the mirror. It feels wrong, uncanny, but also electric. Because in that instant you've stepped back far enough to realize this isn't me, this is something happening to me. From here, the path forward is not about positive thinking. It's about strategic dismantling. The critic has spent years building neural pathways, automatic reflexes of thought. You're not going to defeat it by fighting on its terms. You must change the rules of engagement. Step 1. Separate the voice from the self. The most radical act you can commit against the critic is to strip it of your name. Stop saying, I think I'm not good enough. Say, the critic is saying I'm not good enough. Language rewires perception. When you change the phrasing, you stop treating the voice as truth and start treating it as commentary. Carl Jung spoke often of individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious into conscious awareness. You can't destroy what you can't see, so you make the critic visible, give it a tone, give it a face if you like. Make it a separate character in your mind. The more distinct it becomes, the less it can masquerade as you. Step 2. Interrogate the evidence. The critic thrives on unquestioned authority. It hurls accusations like, you'll embarrass yourself, and you nod along as if it just quoted a law of physics. The rebellion is in forcing it to produce proof. Nietzsche said, Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. Your critic is no different. It lives in illusion. Ask it for concrete evidence of its claims. You'll fail. Based on what? How many times have you succeeded? They won't like you. How do you know? What data supports this? Interrogation does not instantly silence it, but it slows the reflex. And in that space, you reclaim agency. Step 3. Starve it of fuel. The critic feeds on certain environments: constant comparison, doom scrolling, spending time with people who echo its beliefs. If you want to weaken it, you must cut off its supply lines. Arthur Schopenhauer warned that reading is merely thinking with someone else's head. If you're constantly feeding your mind content that reinforces inadequacy, you're letting the critic write the script. Curate your inputs ruthlessly. Protect your mental environment as fiercely as you'd protect your home from an intruder. Step 4. Install a counter-voice. If you remove the critic and leave nothing in its place, the silence will feel unbearable. Your mind is used to narration, so you must build a new one, consciously, intentionally. This is not about mindless affirmations. It's about constructing a voice that speaks from evidence of your capability. Remind yourself of times you acted courageously, even in small ways. Record those victories. Replay them often. Neuroplasticity will do the rest. The brain will wire in whatever patterns you repeat. Viktor Frankl taught that meaning is the ultimate fuel for resilience. Your counter-voice should speak from meaning, not ego. It should remind you of why you are moving forward, not just that you can. Step 5. Take immediate imperfect action. The critic survives on hesitation. Every time you delay action to get ready, it wins another round. The rebellion is in movement. Messy, uncomfortable, but undeniable movement. Think of history's great iconoclasts, people who shattered the narratives they inherited. They didn't wait for permission or perfect conditions. They acted, and in acting, rewrote the voice inside their own heads. This is why you cannot wait until you feel ready. Readiness is the critic's trap. You start before the voice agrees with you. You move while it's still screaming in your ear. Step 6. Redefine failure. Your critic equates failure with identity. Break the link. In reality, failure is data. It is the raw material of mastery. The rebellion reframes every misstep as proof you are in the arena, living in a way the critic never could. If you try something and it collapses, you have gained information. The silent bystanders will never know. That's the currency of growth. You trade the comfort of certainty for the wealth of experience. Step 7. The 7-minute reset. Here's the shock to the system, the point where you rewire in real time. Set a timer for 7 minutes. Sit somewhere quiet. For the first 2 minutes, write down every single sentence the critic throws at you. Don't filter, don't argue, just let it spill. Then, for the next 5 minutes, rewrite each sentence from the perspective of the counter-voice. If the critic says, "You're not ready," you write, "You'll learn faster by starting now." If it says, "They'll reject you," you write, "If they do, it wasn't my place to begin with." By the end of those 7 minutes, you've done 3 radical things. 1. You've separated the critic's voice from your own. 2. You've interrupted the automatic belief in its statements. 3. You've given your mind an alternative script to follow. Done daily, this exercise exploits the same neuroplasticity that built the critic in the first place. Only now, you're the one doing the wiring. The rebellion is not about silencing the critic forever. That's impossible. It's about reducing its influence until it becomes background noise, no louder than the hum of a refrigerator. It's still there, but it no longer decides who you are or what you do. And when that happens, you will notice something strange. The silence the critic leaves behind doesn't feel empty. It feels alive. There's space for curiosity, for creativity, for a sense of self that isn't built from fear. But here's the final twist. The rebellion doesn't just give you freedom from the critic. It forces you to confront the question of who you are without it. And that question leads to the deepest revelation of all. Because once you remove the false voice, the one that's left is so unfamiliar it might frighten you. But it is the only voice that has ever truly been yours. And that is where we go next. Into the ultimate truth. The final, most powerful realization that will change the way you see yourself and the world forever. There's a moment, subtle but seismic, when you've lived with less interference from the critic long enough that you suddenly hear something you didn't expect. Nothing. It's not that the world has gone quiet. It's that the constant internal hum is gone. No rehearsed self-judgments, no reflexive disqualifications, just space. At first, the emptiness can feel unnerving. You've lived for so long in a mental room crowded with hecklers that silence feels unnatural. You might even mistake it for numbness, but then, slowly, you begin to hear other sounds. The faint stirrings of curiosity, the crackle of possibility, and somewhere beneath it all, the soft pulse of something you almost forgot existed. Your own unedited voice. Here's the revelation that hits hardest. You were never trying to find yourself. You were trying to recover the self that was buried under years of someone else's noise. The inner critic was never you. It was a ventriloquist, moving your mouth with its hand, feeding you lines, convincing you they were your own. But now, for the first time, you can tell the difference. Philosophers have long debated the nature of the self. Is it fixed? Is it fluid? Is it an illusion entirely? Buddhism teaches that the self we cling to is a mental construction, a mirage. Descartes anchored existence in the phrase cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. But perhaps the more dangerous assumption is, I think, therefore my thoughts are me. They're not. They never were. Without the critic, your mind becomes less like a courtroom and more like a mirror, reflecting without verdict. When the dust of judgment is wiped away, you see not just what you are, but what you could be. It's here you realize the true cruelty of the critic, not just that it kept you small, but that it convinced you smallness was safety, that living at half volume was wise, that shrinking yourself to fit the room was maturity. Viktor Frankl's great insight that there is a space between stimulus and response becomes visceral here. Without the critic's constant interpretation, that space expands. You no longer jump to the familiar reflex of self-sabotage. You pause. You choose. And choice is the essence of freedom. This is the point where life begins to feel strange again, in the best possible way. You start noticing paths you had never considered because the critic told you they were closed. You see opportunities you once assumed belonged to someone else. What you do next is not yet habit. It is raw, intentional creation. And this is where the fear returns. But now you understand it differently. Fear isn't the voice telling you to stop. Fear is the boundary marker of growth. If you feel it, you're at the edge of your current self. Step past it, and the edges move. The ultimate truth is that removing the critic is not a repair, it's a demolition. The identity you thought was you was built with bricks of limitation, cemented by years of repetition. Without those walls, the shape of you changes, and here lies the deepest paradox. The person you're becoming may feel like a stranger, yet they are the most natural version of you that has ever existed. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, the one who creates their own values, was never about power over others. It was about power over inherited scripts. When you stop inheriting the critic's voice, you begin writing your own code. But beware, this freedom will cost you. The critic was a convenient scapegoat. As long as it ruled, you could say, I would, but the voice stops me. Once it's gone, there's no one left to blame. The choices you make are yours, the failures too. And yet, this is the price worth paying, because the victories will be yours as well. Not handed to you, not stumbled upon, but chosen and fought for in the absence of the voice that once told you not to try. The absence of the critic doesn't mean the absence of challenge. Life still throws storms at you, but now you meet them without the added weight of a saboteur inside your own head. One day, you'll sit in that same quiet room where this began. You'll listen for the voice, and maybe you'll hear it, fainter now, almost embarrassed to speak. It will still have opinions, still offer its tired predictions, but it will sound small. And over its whisper, you'll hear something else, a new voice, or perhaps an old one you forgot. The voice of the part of you that wanted to paint before you learned about talent, that wanted to speak before you learned about worthiness, that wanted to leap before you learned about safety. This voice will not flatter you. It will challenge you, but it will do so without cruelty. It will not shrink you to keep you safe. It will expand you to see you grow. Here is the truth you carry forward. The inner critic is not the enemy. It was the training partner that got too aggressive, the guard who forgot to open the gates, the outdated survival mechanism that kept you alive long enough to outgrow it. Killing it was never the point. Outgrowing it was. Because the real victory is not in silencing the critic. It's in living a life so full, so engaged, so self-authored, that the critic's words become irrelevant. You stop asking, "Is the voice right?" and start asking, "What do I want to do next?" And in that moment you will know. The voice may still exist, but you are no longer inside its story. You are writing your own. So you sit there, feeling the space in your own mind, and realize it was never really quiet you were chasing. It was sovereignty. 7 minutes to begin, a lifetime to master. And the next time you hear that old whisper, "You can't," you'll smile, not because you believe it, but because it reminds you of how far you've come. You'll think, "Thank you for trying to protect me, but I don't need you anymore." And you'll step forward into the uncharted, unfiltered territory that is finally wholly your own.